Vriende, ons staan hier so saam met Trevor. Trevor is 'n leraar in die Methodiste kerk daar in Sasolburg. En Trevor is 'n uiters joviale persoonlikheid. Ek geniet hom vreeslik. Ek het hom nie geken voor die toer nie, maar ek geniet sy joviale persoonlikheid verskriklik baie. Trevor, ek het sommer vir jou gevra om saam met my bietjie te reflekteer oor die gemeente van Shepherd's Grove wat ons vandag besoek het. Wat is dit dis nogal 'n gemeente met 'n pynlike geskiedenis, nou, 'n pynlike verhaal. Ek dink baie traumaties. Wat is die goeters wat vir jou opgeval het van Shepherd's Grove?
I think the one thing that one of the things that stood out today was they were very open and honest about the pain that they have experienced, and it's only 5 or 6 years ago. And they were also very open about the process, the succession process that they've been through, and the transition. So the whole transition that they were forced to undertake. And the way that there were two things that struck me about, two anchors that kind of held things together for me as they were talking. I'm sure there were other things, but just from what they were saying, things that stood out for me. The one anchor for them over the last 6 or 10 years or so has been their Bible study fellowship groups. They spoke about how the fellowship and the sense of strong community kept those core people together when everything else was just being thrown around.
Ja, so in daardie groepe was daar 'n baie hoë vlak van commitment. En daai mense was ankerpilare in die gemeente wat
vir mekaar. So they obviously they chose to stay connected to the church because they were connected to each other. And even though the leadership was changing and the senior pastor was changing and young people were coming in and they were even merging with another church, they stayed. The other thing that struck me, the other anchor that struck me was the new pastor, the new senior pastor, in the midst of all of this turmoil and trying to understand what kind of church they are and where they're meant to be going, was their why. Why are we here? And he spoke about how the new senior pastor went back into history and looked at the reasons why the church began in the beginning, and kind of held on to that and lifted that up for the church as they were moving forward. So for me, those two anchors kind of stood out for me, and particularly they stood out for me because where I am in Sasolburg in the Vaal Triangle, there's just a huge amount of change in the church, change in society, in the community. All kinds of change. Hard, difficult things are happening. People's lives are being, ripped apart. And for us as a church community, it's really affected us a lot. All of the change in the surrounding community. And then of course there's change in the church all the time. Things are changing. And so there's some things that we need to hold on to. And so these two things were really stood out today.
En daai why, die hoekom jy doen wat jy doen, dit verskaf aan jou anker en standvastigheid en identiteit, né? My een kollega Gerry, hy het altyd gesê vir ons dat ons moet bepaal wat is ons groot hoekom. En as ons en die natuurlike ding, dit klink baie natuurlik, maar dit is nie. Die natuurlike ding is om vas te val in die hoe en die wat. Die praktiese goeders van die bediening, maar die hoe en die wat beteken niks as jy die hoekom verkeerd kry nie. So dit is baie waar. Hulle het gevra toe hulle in hierdie turmoil is, toe gevra hulle sê wat is ons groot hoekom? Hoekom is ons wie ons is? Hoekom doen ons wat ons doen? En dit het toe vir hulle 'n sin van identiteit gegee.
And I think in our country with all the change that's going on, the how and the what, that also changes. And if we base our ministry on how we do what we do and what we do, after a few years we won't have a ministry because that stuff's going to become irrelevant. people aren't going to be, it's not going to be resonating with them anymore. But if we understand why we are where we are, why has God put Sasolburg Methodist Church in Sasolburg, then how we do what we do can change to meet the context, to meet the change, and still be relevant to this changing context. We can find new ways of how.
Ja, dis presies.
But still be faithful to the why.
To the why. Ja, jy sê dit mooi. Nee, dis presies dit. Vir myself dink ek het nogal het my baie getref aan hoe miskien ook dat 'n mens kan leer uit hulle foute uit. Die feit dat 'n mens kan sien dat hulle nie vinnig genoeg verander het en jong leiers opgerig het nie. So dit is 'n ietsie om in gedagte te hou dat jy altyd jouself moet besig hou met die oprig van jong leiers en ook moet kan delegeer en vir hulle kan oorgee. Anders maak dit daai transisie net soveel moeiliker. Daarmee saam is een van die ander foute wat ek dink wat ek raak sien is onverantwoordelike vernuwing wat plaasgevind het. So toe die leiersels oorgegee is en het een van die leraars onverantwoordelik vernuwe en eintlik op 'n manier die gemeente vervreem van die leraarspan en 'n groot vertrouensbreuk het gekom. So miskien is dit ook net 'n baie groot ernstige waarskuwing oor vernuwing, hoe 'n mens vernuwe, dat 'n mens dit baie verantwoordelik sal doen. En dan miskien ook maar net die gevaar van groupthink. Ons het vroeër 'n bietjie daaroor gepraat dat as jy 'n sterk leier het, is jou span geneig om altyd die leier na te praat en nie met kritiese denke vorendag te kom nie. En ek dink 'n goeie leier sal juis wil waak teen groupthink en bevraagtekening verwelkom. So ek dink in daardie konteks in die vroeëre toe dit nou nog Crystal Cathedral was daar nie 'n atmosfeer waar dit verwelkom is as jy kritiese vrae gevra het oor die bediening nie. En gevolglik het jy 'n stelsel gekry wat nogal toksies was met groupthink en het dit op die ou ende gemaak dat die gemeente hulle deure moes gesluit het. Maar die gemeente wat nou ontstaan het, Shepherd's Grove, is gesond. Daar's 'n vitaliteit in die gemeente. Die nuwe leraarspan het my baie beïndruk. Hulle nederigheid, hulle leergierigheid, dit het my regtig beïndruk.
I think what impressed me more was the old guys on staff.
Is baie waar.
That used to be the executive pastors for the previous minister. Hulle is nog daar, but they're now mentoring and coaching and volunteering and supporting and encouraging the new guys.
Dit is so. Hulle het nie vasgehou aan mag nie.
That was like for me.
Hulle het weggegee en hulle dien.
That was like an amazing thing for me. That when their leader, I mean, when that whole thing happened and the church leadership fell apart, the fact that there's still space for them to offer their counsel and their guidance and their wisdom, the fact that they still want to do it, that they've really humbled themselves when they could probably do the job much better.
Baie ervaring, alles.
Because, I mean, they're 70 odd years old with all that history and all that experience, 25, 30 years experience in that same ministry. And now there's these 30-year-olds coming in and they're as executive pastors and senior pastor and just that whole dynamic, the relationships that exists between the new young guys that are paid and the old retired guys that are there and still serving and still supporting and encouraging. That for me that het my baie getref.
Jy's reg.
And I think one of the things that we don't get right, and I'm talking now about the Methodist Church, in terms of leadership, is when your term of leadership is finished, dan is jy uit leierskap uit en dan is daar nou nuwe leiers. And there's no mentoring, there's no coaching, there's no kind of process of handing over leadership. So if we're not careful in the way we do things, you can have a whole new leadership team of lay people. En ek loop saam met hierdie 10, 12, 15 mense vir 5 jaar of so, en dan skielik is daar 'n hele nuwe groep mense. And that can be that can be a huge problem. But I'm just so blessed by what they were saying and how they were just relating to each other.
Dit was vir my, as ek kan net hoor as jy praat, dit is nogal net die realiteit, as jy, dat ons soveel van ons identiteit kry uit die verlede uit. Mens kon gesien het vandag ook, hoeveel keer hulle probeer sin maak uit wie ons vandag is, op grond van wie ons, van ons stories in die verlede.
Ja.
En, so dit moet baie moeilik wees as jy elke paar jaar met 'n nuwe span sit, en wat nie daai goue drade van die verlede ken nie.
We try and stagger it so that we don't get a whole new leadership in all at once. But things happen, and people could die or they could move away.
Yes.
So the possibility is there. And so that's one of the things that struck me, is that for me and for Sasolburg Methodist Church, we've got to look at a way of building in a handover succession thing
continuïteit
for the leaders. Never mind the ministers, but the leaders themselves.
Trevor, dankie vir jou tyd om saam met my 'n bietjie te dink en te reflekteer. Ek het nou gesê, ek geniet jou spontaniteit en jou lag so baie, maar selfs nog meer as dit.
Ek gaan dit nie nou doen nie, hoor.
Selfs nog meer as dit, geniet ek dit om jou dop te hou en te sien hoe soekend jy is. So tussen die afsprake deur, dan kan ek sien as jou kop in die werk, en is jy die hele tyd besig om hierdie inligting te integreer vir jou konteks. En ek kan sien jy is iemand wat die bediening baie ernstig opneem, jou roeping baie ernstig opneem. Ek het sommer baie waardering vir jou daarvoor, hoor. Mag die Here jou regtig seën in julle gemeente.
Well, I think I can say the same for you.
Thank you.
I never thought of doing this.